He left me to care for his dying mother while he's in Miami with a 23-year-old. Wait until he learns who she just rewrote her will for the day. Rose decided to change her will was the same day. Jim sent a group text announcing his surprise engagement to Sophie. He didn't even call his mother personally. I held Rose as she cried not from the cancer this time, but from something far more malignant, the death of a mother's last hopes for her son. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. I still remember every detail of that morning. The autumn sun was streaming through the hospital-style curtains we'd installed in Rose's bedroom, casting long shadows across her medical equipment. She was having one of her better days. We'd managed to get her to eat a small breakfast, and her pain levels were relatively manageable. I was adjusting her pillows when both our phones. Jim simultaneously excited to share that Sophie said yes. Miami sunset proposal was perfect. Wedding details coming soon. The message was complete with a beach photo of Jim, tanned and grinning down on one knee, in front of a slim young woman whose white dress practically glowed in the setting sun. Sophie's perfectly manicured hand was stretched toward the camera, showing off what looked like a small fortune wrapped around her finger. Rose's iPad slipped from her trem. Ling fingers. I caught it before it hit the ground, but I couldn't catch the pieces of her breaking heart. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen, her face a canvas of emotions, disbelief, hurt, anger, and finally a deep consuming sadness that seemed to age her. 10 years in 10 seconds. He used to call me first, she whispered, her voice catching with everything. His first in school, his college acceptance, his first business deal. She traced the edge of her blanket with shaking fingers. I sold my mother's rings to help him start his company. You know, he promised he'd buy them back one day. I sat on the edge of her bed, taking her frail hand in mine. The past 3 months of caring for Rose had taught me when to speak, and when silence was the better companion this moment needed. Both 7 missed calls, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, 7 times. I tried to reach him last week during my worst chemo session. His assistant said he was in meetings, on a yacht, apparently. She gestured weakly to another photo in Jim's social media stream, him and Sophie on a boat. Champagne glasses raced to the Miami skyline. The medical equipment beeped steadily in the background as Rose pushed herself up straighter against her pillows. There was a shift in her expression, subtle but significant. The hurt was still there, but something else was emerging. Determination. Emma, she said, reaching for her phone. Would you help me make a call? I expected her to try Jim again, instead. She dialed Tom Harris, her lawyer of 20 years. Her voice was clear and steady as she spoke. It's Rose Walker. I need you to come by today. It's about my will. He paused, listening. No, I can't wait. Some things need to change after she hung up. Rose turned to me with a look I'd never seen before. Part sadness, part resolve, and something that might have been satisfaction, you know? Emma, I've spent my whole life teaching literature, all those great stories about justice, consequences, and moral choices. Perhaps it's time I wrote my own ending. The rest of that morning unfolded with a strange sort of clarity. Rose asked me to help her sit properly in her chair. By the window, the one she used to grade papers in for decades. She wanted to look presentable for Tom's visit as I helped her with her favorite cashmere cardigan. She told me stories about Jim as a little boy. Happy stories, but they weren't nostalgic ramblings. They were evident being presented to an invisible jury. A mother's love should be a compass, she said as I brushed her thinning hair. Not a doormat. He caught my eye in the mirror. I enabled him, Emma. All these years protecting him from consequences, making excuses for his behavior. That stops today when Tom arrived that afternoon. Rose was ready. The 3 of us sat in her sun-filled room, surrounded by the beeping machines that kept track of her failing body, but not her sharp mind. I started to leave them for privacy, but Rose gripped my hand. Stay, she said. You need to hear this too. I had no idea then that I was about to become central to Rose's final act of maternal love. a lesson in consequences that would shake her son's perfect Miami life to its core. As Tom opened his briefcase and began to explain the processes of amending a will, I watched Rose Walker transform from a dying mother into something else entirely, an author of justice. Writing her last and most important chapter after Tom left that afternoon, something shifted in our daily routine. Rose's room, once a shrine to her son's achievements, began to transform. One by one, she asked me to take down Jim's photos, carefully wrapping each frame in tissue paper. Not throwing them away, she explained, just making space for a different kind of memory. The space between Rose's medical treatments became filled with unexpected moments of connection. During her better hours, she'd share stories from her teaching days, her eyes lighting up as she recalled students who'd overcome obstacles or discovered their love for literature in her classroom. These weren't just nostalgic ramblings. They were pieces of herself. She was carefully entrusting to me. "You know, Emma," she said one evening as I adjusted her pain medication, "I used to think being a good mother meant always being there, always saying yes. Now, I wonder if sometimes love needs to look more like accountability." Our days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for medical routines, checking vitals, managing medications, helping with basic needs. But afternoons, when Rose's energy peaked, became our time. She taught me to play chess on her antique board, laughing softly at my terrible strategies. "Life's a lot like chess," she'd say, taking my queen with her. Nights, sometimes the most powerful pieces aren't the ones you expect. The nurses who came to check on her noticed the change too. Rose was no longer the quiet, compliant patient who apologized for every inconvenience. She began asking questions about her treatment, making decisions about her care. With newfound assertiveness, when one doctor suggested an aggressive treatment option, Rose simply smiled and said, "I'd like to focus on quality of life now, not just quantity." It wasn't all peaceful moments and profound conversations. There were hard nights when the pain broke through the medication's barrier, when Rose would cry out in her sleep during those dark hours as I held her hand and whispered comfort. I'd feel a deep anger toward Jim. How could he not be here? How could Miami's beaches be more important than these precious final moments with his mother? One particularly rough evening, after helping Rose through a severe pain episode, I found her looking through her iPad again instead of Jim's Instagram feed. She was scrolling through emails from former students. "Listen to this," she said, her voice tired but warm. "Dear Mrs. Walker, today, I defended my doctoral thesis in English literature. I kept thinking about how you once told me that stories have the power to change lives. You changed mine. That's what legacy really means. Emma, the community around." Rose grew stronger as Jim's absence stretched longer. Her former colleagues from Morton High would visit, bringing books and memories. The elderly couple next door started sending over homemade soup every Sunday. Even Dr. Chin, usually rushed and clinical, would linger after checkups to discuss classic novels with Rose. Meanwhile, Jim's text messages became increasingly shallow. "Hope, you're feeling better, Mom, or busy with wedding plans? We'll call soon." Each one was like a paper cut to Rose's heart, but she'd stopped flinching at them. Instead, she'd hand me her phone with a sad smile and ask me to read her another chapter from Pride and Prejudice. The turning point came exactly 6 weeks after the engagement announcement. Rose had just finished a particularly grueling round of treatments, and I was helping her settle back into her favorite chair. Her hands shook as she reached for her tea, but her voice was steady. "Emma," she said, "I need you to understand something, what I'm doing with the will. It's not about punishment, it's about recognition. Recognition of choices and their consequences. Recognition of who shows up when showing up matters most." She took my hand, then her grip surprisingly strong. "You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to learn how I like my tea, or memorize my medication schedule, or read me Jane Austen until you lost your voice. But you did. You chose to be here. That's what family really means." That evening, as I watched Rose finally drift off to sleep, I realized we'd both changed. She was no longer just Jim's mother, and I was no longer just his girlfriend who stayed behind. We had become something else entirely, something chosen rather than given, something built on shared moments of strength and vulnerability. The photos on her walls now told a different story instead of Jim's carefully curated life moments. There were cards from students, pictures of sunset views from her window, and a single new photo. Rose and me playing chess, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. It wasn't the family either of us had expected, but it was the one we built. One quiet afternoon at a time. As our bond grew stronger, Jim's Miami facade became increasingly transparent through his social media updates. Each new post felt like a slap in the face, not to me anymore, but to everything Rose had sacrificed for him. There he was, lounging on white sand beach with Sophie, his designer sunglasses probably costing more than his mother's monthly medication. Just closed, another major deal, celebrating with my queen at Sophie Style at the hottest new rooftop bar in Miami, Entrepreneur Life. Rose watched each update from her iPad, her expression growing more resolved with every swipe she'd stopped commenting on his posts weeks ago. Instead, she'd simply tilt the screen so I could see and say, well, I suppose the rooftop bar was more urgent than his mother's oncology appointment today. The financial strain began to show. In subtle ways, bills for Rose's care started arriving marked past due. Jim's contributions to her medical expenses became sporadic, then stopped altogether when I called his office about it. His assistant Morgan sounded genuinely embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, Emma." Mr. Walker has redirected most of his accounts toward other priorities. The pause spoke volumes later that day. Sophie posted photos of her designer wedding dress fitting the caption, read, "Only the best for the future Mrs." Walker Rose refused to let me use my savings to cover the bills. Instead, she quietly sold her collector's edition books piece by piece. Each time a package left the house, a small piece of her literary heart went with it, but she never complained. Books are meant to be ours, she'd say, not locked away in glass cases. The breaking point came during one of Sophie's Instagram live sessions. She was giving a tour of their Miami penthouse. Chattering about their renovation plans, the camera panned across a familiar antique desk in their living room. Rose's writing desk, the one Jim had borrowed months ago for his home office. "Oh, this old thing," Sophie's voice dripped with casual disdain. "Yeah, it's like super vintage or whatever. We're probably going to have it refinished in white to match our modern aesthetic. But Babe's mom is like super attached to it or something. Whatever." Rose watched the entire video without a word, her face unreadable. Then she picked up her phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Tom Harris, the second was to an antique appraiser. She knew that evening as I helped her with her evening routine, she finally spoke about it. "You know what's ironic, Emma? That desk was where I graded papers for 30 years, where I wrote letters of recommendation that helped students get into college, where I set up late planning lessons that would make literature come alive for teenagers who thought they hated reading." She smoothed her blanket with trembling hands, and now it's going to be painted white to match their aesthetic. The next week, Jim's rare calls became even rarer. When he did call, it was always on speakerphone. Sophie's voice chirping in the background about wedding plans and social events. He never asked about Rose's treatment progress, or pain levels, never noticed how his mother's voice was getting weaker, how her breathing was becoming more labored. Instead, he talked about himself, his business expansion, his new connections, his upcoming feature in a business magazine. "You'll be proud, Mom," he'd say. Not waiting for her response before launching into another story about his success, Sophie's social media presence grew more prominent. She started a wedding planning vlog, documenting every expensive detail of their upcoming celebration future. Mrs. Walker, Living My Best Life became her brand, complete with sponsored posts and partnership deals. One afternoon, after a particularly tone-deaf call, where Jim talked for 20 minutes about his new yacht, while Rose struggled to breathe between responses, she turned to me with tears in her eyes, but these weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of clarity, Emma, she said softly. "I think it's time for the next phase of our plan. Would you help me make a video call to Tom? There are a few more changes I'd like to make to the will." Tom Harris became a regular visitor during those final weeks, his leather briefcase always filled with documents that required Rose's careful attention. But we weren't alone in our quiet revolution. The neighborhood had noticed Jim's absence and responded with a presence of their own. Dr. Sarah Chin started making house calls on her days off, often bringing homemade soup and medical supplies. She'd accidentally ordered extra of Mary Lou, who'd cleaned the Walker house for 20 years, refused to accept payment anymore. Saying simply, "Family doesn't charge, family the elderly baker next door," became our unofficial lookouts, reporting any suspicious cars or people who might be Jim's spies. Though we never saw any Mr. Baker would tend to Rose's beloved garden while his wife kept us supplied with fresh baked goods in neighborhood gossip. Even Tom went beyond his professional duties. He'd arrive early for their meetings armed with legal papers and stories about his own mother's battle with cancer. Years ago, the law, he told Rose one afternoon, is supposed to serve justice, but sometimes justice needs a little help from those who understand the whole story. One particularly memorable day, Lisa Kim, my best friend and local nurse, brought over a stack of letters from Rose's former students. They'd started a kind of chain reaction on social media. Not the glossy filtered kind that Sophie posted, but real messages from real people whose lives Rose had touched. "Dear Mrs. Walker," one letter began, "I'm now teaching English at Morton High, sitting at the same desk where you once sat. Every time help a student discover their voice in writing, I think of you." Rose insisted on reading each letter herself, even on days when her hands shook too much to hold the paper. I'd often find her late at night, surrounded by these testimonials to her life's work, making notes in her shaky handwriting about each student and their journey. Meanwhile, Tom was methodically building what he called an airtight case. He gathered evidence of Jim's neglect, documented missed payments for medical care records, of unanswered calls during critical medical decisions, and timestamps of social media posts showing him partying while his mother underwent chemotherapy. "It's not about revenge," Tom explained during one of our private conversations. "It's about protecting Rose's true legacy. Sometimes the law needs to recognize the family we choose, not just the family we're born into." The community's support grew stronger as Rose grew weaker. A rotation of visitors kept her spirits up. Former colleagues bringing books, students returning to share their successes, neighbors dropping by with food and company. Each visitor was carefully documented by Tom, building a contrast between those who showed up and those who didn't. One evening after a particularly difficult day of treatments, Rose called us all to her room. Tom, Dr. Chin, Mary, the Bakers, and me. Her voice was weak, but her mind was sharp as ever. "I want you all to know something," she said. Looking at each face in turn when I started this journey, I thought I was alone except for Emma. "But you've shown me that family isn't about DNA or legal documents. It's about who shows up, who stays, who cares enough to remember how you like your tea, or which flowers make you smile." She reached for the latest draft of her will on her bedside table. "What I'm doing might seem harsh to some, my son." Her voice caught slightly. "Jim might not understand at first, but sometimes the greatest act of love is holding someone accountable for their choices." The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Rose continued, "Each of you has played a part in showing me what real family means, and that's what this document really represents. Not revenge, not punishment, but recognition of the family we choose and the love we earn." Tom cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Everything is in order, Rose. Whenever you're ready to finalize it." Rose smiled, that familiar determined look in her eyes. "Good, because I have a feeling we're going to need it sooner rather than later." Rose's predict proved eerily accurate. Within 2 weeks, her condition deteriorated rapidly. The nights grew longer, filled with labored breathing and whispered conversations during one particularly difficult evening. She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Emma," she whispered. "Promise me you'll see this through. Not for revenge, but for justice for every mother who gave everything and got nothing in return." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I promise, Rose." The next morning I made the call. I'd been dreading. Jink phone went to voicemail twice before he finally answered, the sounds of a beach party evident in the background. "Mom asking for you," I said simply. "The doctors say it's time." There was a pause, then muffled conversation with Sophie, right? We'll get the next flight out, just keep her comfortable, okay?" They arrived 24 hours later. Jim in designer resort wear, and Sophie filming their airport arrival for her Vlog H hospital. Journey with my future hubby, prayers needed. She posted complete with artfully filtered photos of their first-class seats the moment they walked into Rose's room. The temperature seemed to drop. Jim stopped short, taking in his mother's frail form. The medical equipment, the cards and flowers from people who'd actually been there for a brief moment. I saw reality hit him, saw him realize just how much he'd missed, how far he'd stayed away, Sophie still filming. Started here, practice sympathetic commentary. Oh my god, guys, this is like so sad, but don't worry, we're here now, turn that off. Rose's voice, though, weak, cut through the room like steel. James Walker, sit down. We need to talk. The next hour was one of the most intense I'd ever witnessed. Rose summoning strength from some deep reserve, laid out every missed call, every ignored plea for help, every moment Jim had chosen Miami over his mother. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Each word carried the weight of months of absence, but Mom, Jim protested. I've been building our future, the business is taking off, and with the wedding, the wedding, Rose interrupted. That you announced in a group text the same day I started my strongest round of chemo. Yet she paused, catching her breath. The same day I decided to rewrite my will. The word W hit Jim. Like a physical blow, Sophie, who'd been scrolling through her phone, suddenly looked up. I've made my choices, Jim, Rose continued, just as you've made yours. Tom will explain everything after I'm gone. Her voice finally cracked. I just wanted you to hear it from me first to understand why Jim started to argue. But Dr. Chin appeared in the doorway. Rose needs to rest now, she said firmly. You can come back tomorrow, but tomorrow never came. Rose slipped away peacefully that night, holding my hand as she took her final breaths. Jim and Sophie were at their hotel, having decided to get a good night's sleep and freshen up. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and quiet grief. Jim took charge of the arrangements, suddenly playing the role of devoted son, while Sophie documented their journey through loss for her followers. They didn't notice how the community rallied around me instead of them, how the funeral home director checked with me before finalizing any of Jim's plans. Tom scheduled the will reading for 3 days after the funeral. Rose was very specific about the timing. He told me quietly she wanted everyone to have a chance to show their true colors one last time. As I watched Jim and Sophie posing for somber social media photos by Rose's grave, I thought about promises, the ones we keep, the ones we break, and the ones that change everything. Rose had kept every promise she'd ever made to her son. Now it was my turn to keep my promise to her. The day of the will reading dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm about to unfold in Tom's office. I arrived early, settling into the familiar leather chair where Rose and I had planned this moment months ago, one by one. The others filed in, Dr. Chin, Mary Lou. The Bakers all looking solemn but somehow expectant. Jim and Sophie were last to arrive. Him in an expertly tailored black suit, her in what appeared to be a designer morning outfit phone, already positioned to capture what she probably assumed would be a touching family moment. This is such a hard day for us, she whispered to her camera. But Mom would have wanted us to share this journey, family. Legacy grief journey. Tom cleared his throat, silencing the room before we begin. He said, opening a leather portfolio. Rose asked that we watch something. He pressed a button on his computer, and suddenly Rose's face filled the screen on the wall, a video she'd recorded just weeks before her death. My darling son. Her voice filled the room, causing Jim to flinch visibly. If you're watching this, I've already gone. But before Tom reads my final wishes, I needed you to hear something. Every choice we make tells a story about who we are. Your choice is over. These past months, they've told quite a story. James? The video continued as Rose methodically outlined every missed call, every unanswered text, every Instagram post that proved where Jim's priorities had been while she was dying. Sophie's phone slowly lowered as the evidence mounted, but this isn't about punishment. Rose's recording continued. This is about recognition of who was there, who showed up, who proved that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. When the video ended, Tom stood now to the official reading. He opened Rose's will and began to read. The color drained from Jim's face as Tom outlined the details. The house, the sprawling Victorian where Jim had grown up, was now mine, with the provision that part of it be converted into a care center for cancer patients. The majority of Rose's savings, aside from a small trust for her grandchildren, should Jim ever have any, would fund the center's operations. This is ridiculous, Jim exploded, jumping to his feet. I'm her son, her only child. She can't just dash. She can. And she did, Tom interrupted calmly. Everything is legally binding. Rose spent months ensuring this would be airtight. I'll contest it. Jim threatened, his face red. I'll hire every lawyer in the state. I thought you might say that. Tom replied, reaching for another folder. So Rose prepared this too. He proceeded to present documented evidence of Jim's neglect, financial records showing his withdrawn support and timestamps of his social media posts proving his priorities during his mother's final months. Sophie, who had been unnaturally quiet, suddenly stood. This is like so messed up, she declared, her influencer persona cracking. We're supposed to be closing on our new Miami house next week. The down payment was going to come from your expected inheritance, Tom finished quietly. Perhaps this is a good time to mention Rose's letter to the Miami Herald about a son who abandoned his dying mother for a social media lifestyle. It's scheduled to run tomorrow. The silence that followed was deafening. Jim stared at the documents, at the evidence of his own choices. Laid bare, Sophie's fingers flew over her phone, probably already calculating the impact on her follower. Count your mother. I finally said, my voice soft but firm. Spent her entire life teaching students about consequences, about the moral arc of great stories. She decided it was time to teach you the same lesson. Jim turned to me, really looked at me for the first time since Rose's diagnosis. You planned this with her, he said. It wasn't a question, no, Jim. You planned this every time you chose Miami over your mother, every time you ignored her calls, every time you posted about living your best life while she was dying alone, or would have been if not for the family she chose. In the end, Tom gathered his papers, unless there are any questions about the legal specifics. I believe we're done here. Jim and Sophie left without another word. Their perfect Miami life suddenly built on shifting sand as the door closed behind them. I felt Rose's presence in the room in the quiet satisfaction of a final lesson, well taught, the aftermath of the will. Reading unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony, each consequence playing out exactly as Rose had predicted. Jim's attempts to contest the will hit one legal dead end after another. Tom had done his job too well, documenting every missed call, every declined medical bill, every Instagram post that proved where Jim's priorities had been. Within weeks, the Miami dream began to crumble. Sophie's followers turned on her after someone who probably one of Rose's former students leaked the full story of their behavior during Rose's illness. The carefully curated comments section of Hurt Grief Journey posts became a battlefield of public opinion. How could you film yourself at beach parties while his mother was dying? Canel imagine choosing Miami clubs over your dying mom. Unfollowed their perfect facade, started showing cracks. The Miami house deal fell through when the expected inheritance didn't materialize. Sophie's sponsorship deals began disappearing one by one as her reputation took hit after hit. Even Jim's business contacts started distancing themselves. Nobody wanted to be associated with the man who abandoned his dying mother for a young influencer. Meanwhile, I threw myself into fulfilling Rose's vision for the house. The transformation of the Walker family home into the Rose Walker Care Center became my tribute to her. The library where she'd spent countless hours reading to Jim as a child became a peaceful retreat for patients. Her garden, lovingly maintained by Mr. Baker, provided a serene space for families to find moments of peace during difficult times. Dr. Chin joined the center's board of directors, bringing her medical expertise and genuine compassion. Mary Lou continued caring for the house, now telling stories about Rose to the patients and their families. The Bakers became regular volunteers. Mrs. Baker baked goods, bringing comfort to those going through treatment. The local newspaper ran a feature about the center. 6 months after it opened, the reporter interviewed several patients and their families, capturing the spirit of what we'd created. It's not just medical care. One family member said, "It's like being embraced by Rose's legacy of love." The article made its way to Miami. Jim's assistant Morgan, who'd quit shortly after the will reading, told me he'd seen it on his desk. Apparently, he'd spent a long time staring at the photos of the center, particularly one showing his mother's portrait hanging in the main entrance. Sophie's social media empire continued its downward spiral. Her last post about the situation: A teary attempt at damage control only made things worse. I know we made mistakes, but you don't understand how hard it was for us too. We were building our future, misunderstood my bubble. The response was swift and merciless. Even her loyal followers couldn't spin this one positively. Within days, she'd archived most of her photos with Jim and made her account private a year after Rose's passing. I received an unexpected letter from Jim. No lawyer letterhead this time, just simple stationery and shaky handwriting. Emma, I've started therapy. My therapist suggested writing letters as part of the healing process. This is my 4th attempt at writing to you. I saw the article about Mom's Care Center. You've created something beautiful from my biggest failure, something she would have been proud of. I keep thinking about that last day in Tom's office, about everything Mom said in her video. She was right. WR about choices telling our story. My choices told a story of selfishness and neglect. Yours told a story of love and dedication. Sophie left last month, said she couldn't handle the negative energy anymore. But the truth is, I think she saw in me what I'm finally seeing in myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I'm writing to ask for it. Maybe I just needed you to know that Mom's last lesson finally got through. Jim, I placed the letter in Rose's old writing desk, now in my office at the care center, through the window. I could see new flowers blooming in her garden, tended by the hands of those who'd proven what family really means somewhere. I knew Rose was smiling, satisfied that her final act of motherly love, teaching her son about consequences and true family, had finally borne fruit. 1 year turned into 2 at the Rose Walker Care Center. The legacy Rose left behind bloomed into something far more beautiful than any of us could have imagined. The center became known throughout the state as a place where compassion met care, where families found strength in their darkest hours, just as Rose and I had found strength in each other every morning I'd walk through the gardens. Mr. Baker had lovingly expanded, now featuring a memorial fountain, where Rosa's favorite roses bloomed year-round, the sound of water mingling with wind chimes she'd collected over the years, created a peaceful symphony for patients taking their morning walks. Jim's letter wasn't the end of his story, but rather the beginning of his redemption. Monthly donations started arriving at the center, from an anonymous source, always the exact amount needed to cover a struggling family's care costs. It took me 3 months to confirm it was him. Sending help from a distance, perhaps finally understanding what his mother had tried to teach him all along. Sophie's influence faded into internet obscurity, her carefully curated life, becoming a cautionary tale in influencer circles about the price of chasing likes over love. Her final post before disappearing completely was surprisingly reflective. Sometimes the perfect filter can't hide an imperfect heart. Logging off to find my real self. No hashtags needed. The center success drew attention from unexpected places. Medical journals wrote about our holistic approach to patient care. Local schools started sending students to volunteer, learning the same lessons about compassion and literature that Rose had taught for decades. Her former students, now scattered across the country, often returned to share stories with our patients about the teacher who changed their lives. One crisp autumn morning, exactly 2 years after Rose's passing, I found a familiar figure standing in front of her portrait in the main hall. Jim looked different, older, softer somehow. The Miami tan faded to reveal the boy Rose had always seen beneath the businessman's facade. I didn't know if I should come, he said quietly. Not turning around, but I needed to see it for myself. I stood beside him, looking at Rose's smiling face. She would have loved what this place has become. She would have loved what you've made it, he corrected. I've been reading the articles following the center's work. You've given her legacy more meaning than I ever could have. We walked through the center together, Jim, taking in every detail. He paused longest in the library, now filled with Rose's beloved books, each one containing a handwritten note about why she'd loved it. His fingers traced her familiar handwriting, lingering on the margins, where she jotted her thoughts. I found my old college acceptance letter tucked into one of her books. He said, pulling out a worn envelope she'd written on the back, the day my son's dreams took flight. She kept everything, didn't she? every moment, every memory. She never stopped believing in the son she raised. I replied, even at the end, this wasn't about punishment, it was about teaching. He finished her final lesson, the one I finally learned too late before leaving. Jim handed me an envelope inside. Was a check, a substantial one, and a proposal to establish a scholarship fund in Rose's name for families who need extended care, he explained. No strings attached, no publicity, just what Mom would have wanted as I watched him walk through the garden. One last time, stopping to speak softly to a patient enjoying the morning sun, I thought about how Rose's story hadn't ended with her death. It had multiplied, sprouting new chapters through every life touched by her center, every family finding strength. Within these walls, her final lesson hadn't just taught Jim about consequences. It had taught all of us about the power of choosing love over appearance, substance over style, and the quiet dignity of doing what's right. Without an audience in the end, Rose Walker had written her own ending one, where justice came not through vengeance, but through transformation. And in that transformation, she'd given us all a gift, far greater than any inheritance. She'd shown us what it truly means to leave a legacy of love. The Care Center's first anniversary celebration was more than just a milestone. It was a testament to Rose's vision of what family could be. We hosted an open house, inviting the community that had supported us from the beginning. The halls buzzed with life, filled with current and former patients, their families, volunteers, and countless lives touched by Rose's legacy. Jim attended quietly and without fanfare. He'd lost the Miami Flash, trading designer suits for a simple business casual. He spent most of the evening listening to stories about his mother from people who'd known a side of her he'd missed in those final months. Each tale seemed to hit him differently now, the weight of missed opportunities visible in his eyes. Sophie was conspicuously absent, though rumors circulated that she'd rebranded herself as a mindfulness and authenticity coach somewhere in California. Her last known post had been a surprisingly genuine reflection on growth and regret. Without a single hashtag or filter in sight, the celebration's highlight was the dedication of the Rose Walker Memorial Garden, now expanded to include a serene reflection pool surrounded by her favorite roses. As twilight settled, small lights twinkled in the trees, creating the magical atmosphere Rose had always loved. Patty and their families gathered there, sharing stories of hope and healing, Jim said, finding me by the reflection pool. After the main ceremonies, I drove past here every night for a week. Before I finally came in, kept seeing the lights, hearing the wind chimes. Mom used to love. He paused, watching the water ripple. I thought I'd feel like an intruder. But instead, you feel her, I finished softly. He nodded. Every corner of this place has her touch. Not the mother I ignored at the end, but the one who taught me to read under that oak tree under that. They're the one who believed in second chances. The scholarship fund he'd established was already helping 3 families, quietly covering costs that insurance wouldn't touch. He never attached his name to the donations, never sought recognition. It was a different kind of legacy he was building, how one Rose would have understood. Dr. Chin joined us, carrying a worn leather album found. This while organizing Rose's old office, she said. Handling it like a precious artifact inside were photos spanning decades. Rose in her early teaching days, a young Jim at various milestones, and more recent ones of her with patients and their families. The final photo stopped us both short. It showed Rose in her garden, taken just weeks before she passed. She was smiling directly at the camera, her face thin, but her eyes bright with purpose on the back in her elegant handwriting. Remember, love is always the best revenge. Jim's hands shook slightly as he read the inscription. She knew exactly what she was doing, didn't she? Even at the end, she was teaching. She believed in poetic justice, I replied, but she believed in redemption, more as the evening wounded down. Patients returned to their rooms, families headed home, and the garden grew quiet. The wind chimes played their gentle melody, a sound that would forever remind me of late nights reading Jane Austen with Rose planning. Not revenge, but renaissance. Jim lingered until everyone else had left. Standing in front of his mother's portrait in the main hall, he finally looked at peace. I've been thinking about coming back, he said quietly. Not to Miami here. There's a property development company in town, looking for partners. They focus on affordable housing, community projects. The next morning, life at the center resumed its rhythm. Patients walked the gardens, volunteers read stories in the library, and Dr. Chin made her rounds. But something had shifted, as if Rose's final lesson had come full circle. Her story hadn't ended with a simple revenge plot. It had grown into something far more powerful. A testament to the transformative power of choosing love over bitterness, growth over retribution in her final act of motherly love. Rose hadn't just taught her son about consequences. She'd shown us all that sometimes the greatest revenge is living well and leaving a legacy of love that continues to touch lives long after we're gone. Jim's return to town wasn't a grand homecoming. It was quiet, deliberate, like morning dew. Settling on Ars Garden, he rented a modest apartment downtown, far from the luxury condos and beachfront properties that had once defined his life. Every morning, he'd stop by the center before heading to his new office, spending time with patients in the garden. His mother had loved so much. The local development company, Cornerstone Communities, welcomed his expertise, but were initially wary of his past. Jim didn't hide from it. Instead, he used his story as a testament to change, focusing their products on creating spaces that fostered genuine community, something he'd forgotten the value of in Miami. Sophie's influence continued to fade into digital obscurity. Her mindfulness journey lasted about as long as her previous personas, though something about her final post seemed genuinely transformed. Found myself in the silence between posts. Turns out real life doesn't need filters. Goodbye, Graham. Hello, Grace. 1 year after the center celebration, we received news that would have made Rose smile. The Miami house Jim and Sophie had planned to buy was being converted into a community center, funded partially by Jim's new development project. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, the symbol of his former life becoming a space for connection and care. Dr. Chin retired that year, but not before mentoring a new generation of doctors who understood that healing went beyond medicine. The day she hung up her white coat, she handed me a journal. Rose kept this during her last months. She said she wanted you to have it when the time was right. That evening, I sat in Rose's garden, her words bringing her voice back to life. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, our plan worked better than we hoped. But remember, revenge was never the goal. Transformation was. I see it happening already in you, in the center, and yes, even in my son James was always a good boy who lost his way. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices, but it also means leaving the door open for them to find their way back. Take care of my legacies, Emma. Not the building or the money, but the spirit of what we built. Keep teaching, keep loving, keep believing in the power of second chances. All my love. Rose. The journal became a source of guidance. As the center grew, we expanded our programs, partnering with local schools to create mentorship opportunities. Students would read to patients, learn about compassion, and carry Rose's lessons forward into their own lives. Jim threw himself into community work with the same intensity he'd once reserved for chasing success in Miami. He started a program helping young entrepreneurs understand the importance of balancing ambition with humanity. Sometimes during his talks, he'd use his own story as a cautionary tale, never sparing himself the harder details. The Miami business world occasionally tried to lure him back. Old contacts reached out with lucrative offers, promising redemption in the form of oceanfront office and seven-figure deals. Jim's response was always the same, a polite but firm no, usually delivered while helping plant new roses in his mother's garden. One quiet evening, as we sat watching the sunset from Rose's favorite bench, Jim shared something that caught me off guard. You know what I miss most about Mom? He said, his voice soft. Not the big moments, the graduations or business launches. I miss the small things, her humming while grading papers, the way she'd leave no notes in the margins of books. She thought I should read The Smell of Gingerbread at Christmas. He pulled out a worn book from his jacket, a copy of Pride and Prejudice, with Rose's familiar handwriting in the margins. Found this in a box I'd stored away years ago. Her notes. They're like having one last conversation with her. She always did teach best through stories. The center continued to flourish, not just as a place of healing, but as a living testament to Rose's belief in the power of transformation. Each new patient, each family, finding strength within our walls. Each volunteer, discovering the joy of service. They all became part of her ongoing story. In the end, Rose's greatest revenge wasn't in the will or the public aftermath. It was in the quiet revolution. She'd started a revolution of hearts beginning with her sons, rippling outward through countless lives touched by her legacy of love and forgiveness.